A very good afternoon to everyone present here. We have been discussing international marketing over the last few classes. I'm Kolla Krishna Madhavi, and today I will be walking you through Block 2 International Marketing Mix. So, in this, we primarily have three units that we will be discussing. The first one is Unit 4 International Product Planning and Pricing, which will be a part of today's session. And then we'll also be talking about international marketing communication and international marketing channels. So let us first start with this unit, that is Unit 4 International Product Planning and Pricing. So the fundamental objectives of today's session is the first one is to understand the meaning of product and product standardization and product adaptation. We'll also be looking in terms of international product life cycle and its marketing application. We'll also be talking about the strategic significance of branding and packaging, and finally, we'll move to the pricing decisions. So let us first start with the introduction and understand what this topic is all about. So just because a product is successful in one country, we need to understand that it is not necessarily going to be equally successful in other countries. When we are talking about one country, it is usually the home country that we are talking about or the domestic market. Now, we may decide to go internationally to more than one country. So, we need to understand how it works and what works. What are the differences in our four P's or the marketing mix that we talk about? That is the product, price, place, and promotion. We'll also be talking about the product life cycle and whether it is different from that we have observed in a domestic setup. So, what we also need to understand is that any product which is being offered in the domestic market will not be successful equally if we serve it in the same platter that we are serving locally. By that, what we mean, there is a certain modification that is required. There is a certain change that is required, maybe an entirely different product or a different product line, maybe more complementary or accessories that need to be attached to that particular product. The value of a product in one country need not be the same in another country. And why is that so? Because fundamentally, when you're looking at customers, the demographics of customers vary not only within a country, but very largely from country to country. So we need to understand that the principles, though you accepted in the domestic market, cannot be introduced in exactly the same manner in an international market. So first, let us look in terms of the definition of the product. So we begin our introduction by global product decisions. So what does this mean? We need to understand what are the product concepts that are typically covered under this scenario. So here we are talking in terms of a basic marketing course which talks about for product, price, place and promotion of 4 P's, but we'll be expanding on that a little further to suit an international market. So new product development consists of 6 distinct steps. And what are they? The first step is the generation of new product ideas. This can mean that a number of ideas are generated, not just internally, that means from the employees or management, but also from other stakeholders. So it could be the competitors, the government, the marketing research firms, customers themselves who give feedback on a particular product. The second step involves the screening of ideas. So, when we are talking in terms of ideas, we need to acknowledge and review to determine their feasibility. So, what is the feasibility of a product? To understand the feasibility or suitability, An important aspect that we need to understand is in terms of who are our potential users, who is going to use our product, who is going to consume our product, and then determine our features accordingly. So, an advertisement based on the product can be drawn and shown to some of a focus group to understand the candid reactions, and then maybe even as a rule, we go further and change the product details. The third step in a business analysis, which is necessary to estimate product features, cost, demand, and product, would further be amplified if we move to the fourth step, that is actually the product development. So, a typical question that can arise at this point is, my product is already in the market, it's doing well locally. So, why should I go back to the drawing board and talk in terms of product development? So, what we need to understand is that product development in an as is condition cannot be introduced internationally. We have been talking about it over the last few units, and again stressing on the same point that it varies based on who is the ultimate user of our product. So, a prototype at this stage is very much possible, which is usually handmade, or if there is existing machinery that can be adapted for the change product development or product line, that is to be used. Based on that, we get a sense of whether the product is feasible, it is suitable to the new market, whether it is viable in terms of profits, and what is the costing, resources, manpower involved in producing that particular product. So, the next aspect that we'll be talking about is product adoption. So, when we are entering into a foreign market, marketers have to consider factors that influence product adoption. At the end of the day, if there is no purchaser of a product, then what is the point of going through this entire exercise of creating a product, developing a product, and then finally introducing it into an international market, and there are no buyers? So, this is what we need to understand. For a product to gain acceptance, it must demonstrate its relative advantage over the products being offered by competitors. So, what are the existing alternatives? What are they offering? For example, if I am going to offer a washing machine in an international market and it is more or less a copy or very similar to that being offered by other competitors, then my product may not sell. So, what are the variants that I'm bringing? Am I bringing a different sensory touch? Am I bringing a motherboard with LCD? Am I bringing a washing machine with a light? Am I bringing a washing machine which has less consumption of water? So there are multiple things that we need to consider before we introduce a product into the market, because at the end of the day, our product has to be differentiated from those existing in the market already. So it also has to be compatible. When we say compatible, it has to be in agreement with the local customs and habits. A freezer would not find a market in Asia. However, it is a very, very accepted product in say a country like the US, where they not only have a freezer attached to the fridge, but they have separate freezers, because the amount of food that they freeze is far higher than say what is done in an Asian home. So that has to be considered. And then we also need to think in terms of trialability and divisibility. What does this mean? That means we first trial the product in a small setup with a few users, few potential users, and see how their response is. We earlier talked about introducing it to a focus group. Now we are trying to actually sense what is the response to a product in the market. For that, we will be doing a small trialability and divisibility, and based on that, we will get a sense of whether a product has an acceptance, whether there is certain changes that are still needed, or if there is um, a total rejection of a product. Now, that is something also that we need to understand and be prepared for. So the first four variables that we have talked about are relatively positive to the adoption process. There is another important and very complex aspect that we need to consider, that is pricing. So prior to 1982, copiers, if you know, as they were, and more popularly, they're known as Xerox machines. Um, so copiers were very, very expensive. They were huge in size. Then Canon came out with personal copiers, which it introduced to the customers with small cartridges. And the cartridges were made in such a manner that customers could change it themselves. So what happened was, in this process, they brought out a copier which was not only smaller, sturdier, but which was very, very customer centric. So that way, there was a higher adoption of their product in the local market. And not only that, and even when they introduced it into an international market, it gained a lot of acceptance. The next thing that we'll be talking about is the theory of product life cycle, and that is how different is it from that of an international versus domestic market. So, if you see in terms of the basic structure, it remains the same in terms of the product life cycle. However, what we need to understand is, at the initial stage, we are not starting from ground zero. That means the product has already been introduced into the domestic market. Now, we are talking in terms of whether we need to export a product or import a product, depending on which side of the coin we are. And then what kind of cycle happens. So the first cycle that happens over a period of time is that you introduce it into a new country. The second one is, there is an international product life cycle that occurs where the product goes through the growth, maturity, and finally a slowdown or decline. And then we also have other advanced nations and how is our product working in that country. So this international product life cycle is not a replica of a domestic product life cycle. There are other factors that we need to consider, right from introduction, growth, maturity, and finally a decline stage. And we also need to understand that this will not even be standard across different host countries. We have been talking about trading blocks, we have been talking about regions, we have been talking about how there are multiple macro factors which will make a product different in the way it is being adopted from one country to another country, even within the same trading block. So the first one is stage zero. So here we are talking in terms of local innovation. So stage zero, which is depicted as time zero, as we have seen. I'll just move up the slide so you can see here. For example, we are seeing zero. So this is the initial stage. So this is where the local innovation happens. So stage zero represents a regular and highly familiar product life cycle in operation within its own original market, own market. So what is that original market? The domestic market where the product has already been introduced. And then innovations are likely to occur in highly developed countries because consumers are more discerning, they're more demanding, and there are a lot of regulations as well that are introduced in a advanced country. At the same time, there are also a number of competitors that are present there. So our product has to compete with multiple people. So we have to start preparing from that local innovation, that is stage zero, to the overseas innovation, that is stage one, keeping all these factors in context. So as soon as the new product is well developed, its original market is well cultivated, and there may be a certain saturation level that occurs within the domestic market, or it may still be in a stage of maturity or growth. However, the company is looking to introduce its product in an overseas market. so that it can expand its sales and thereby increase its profits. So this stage is known as, that is stage one, is known as a pioneering or international introduction stage. So first stage zero, we saw local or domestic introduction, and second is stage one, where it is overseas innovation. Then we move to the stage two, which is common for most product life cycles, that is a maturity stage. A maturity stage is where firms commit themselves to starting local production, often with the help of the government's positive responses and measures to ensure that certain infant industries are preserved. What are these industries? That means industries which are in the early stage. So if you look in terms of how washing machines were in India 10 years back or 15 years back, it was in an early infant stage, whereas today it is highly developed. So it goes with television as an example. So that is where companies want to introduce the products so that they can gain benefit from the host country's policies and regulations. Then the third one that we'll be talking about is the stage three, that is worldwide imitation. So this means that there is a tough time for innovative products because a number of players have come into the market. And what they tend to do is when there is a highly competitive market, the prices come down because there are more players. They want to capture a bigger market share. So how do companies support this kind of a change that happens? By making sure that they have some differentiation techniques which they employ to differentiate their products from those of competitors. And then finally, we have the final stage, which is a reversal stage. So here, all good things have to end, but certain times we need to understand that a favorable situation is not going to exist forever. So, a product standardization has happened. There is a comparative disadvantage in terms of what the product is being offered and what the competitors are offering. What new products have been introduced in, as a replacement? For example, if you see in terms of televisions, 15 years ago, televisions were being imported from, say, in India, from original line, from manufactured by LG, but say in Thailand. And if you see the kind of screens that were there, though they were large and very robust, they had four motherboards today, and they were far thicker in size. Today, when we are talking in terms of the same television, we find the size may be more or less the same, but now there is a single motherboard. It is highly integrated, and the size of the television has become thinner and thinner. So it has started shrinking, making it that much more viable. So, if this kind of a change happens, how do we expect consumers to go back and purchase the old models when they have newer, sleeker, better models in the market? So that is where the stage four, that is reversal, happens. At the same time, we need to understand about product standardization versus product adaptation. So, product standardization is fundamentally a stage where the product is designed for the local market, but it is now being exported to other countries. So, it has to have some element of change. However, this has to be standardized over a period in time so that the product is more or less similar to what is being offered um, across multiple nations. Now, the question that may come to your mind is, earlier we were talking in terms of customizing a product to the local market, that is the host country, and differentiating it across multiple countries. And at the same time, now we are talking in terms of product standardization, a query that may easily arise. So, what we are primarily talking about is some cosmetic changes that occur. It could be in terms of the color, it could be in terms of packaging, it could be in terms of the quantity or size of the product. That those kind of variations are possible from country to country in the domestic versus international market. However, we are not saying that you are creating an entirely new product from scratch. We are trying to customize it, localize it, so that it suits the sensibilities of the local market. It is in accordance with their culture, their approach to product consumption, the government rules and regulations. At the same time, we are also saying that the changes are not major, they are minor, so that there is a higher adaptation internationally. So, arguments for standardization. So, what would it be? One, and at a very, very fundamental level, we would say that if you standardize our products, there is simplicity and a lowering of cost involved because the production size is increasing, the production numbers are increasing. There is a scale that is happening there, which is benefiting back to the country and particularly the company which is producing that particular product. It is also far easier for management, the employees to understand and implement whatever changes are required because that cuts across all um, product lines. And the same thing is being offered in multiple countries. At the same time, there is, when we have been talking in terms of economies of scale, we also need to understand that sometimes the result is that there is a demand abroad, but because we are standardizing a product to a very large extent, there can be some kind of a decline that is happening because our products are not the same as those of value adds that are being offered by competitors. So, this is something that we need to understand. So, as an example, if we were to consider a consistent company or product image that is needed, product uniformity has to be there. It is required. If you talk in terms of McDonald's across the nation, um, not only in the US, but across nations, internationally, the logo of McDonald's, for example, the icon who is seated, the bench system, everything, the look and feel of the outlets, everything remains the same. But while major things are standardized, we find that there are certain variations. What are those variations about in terms of the type of ingredients that are going into the food or making of burgers, as an example, or the way it is packaged, the way there is a clear vegan, green, and non veg symbols or the circles, as you may know, that appear on each packaging of food, the kind of sensibilities they have in terms of what can be used as an ingredient in one particular country, the same product is not necessarily introduced in another country. Another factor that we can, study is how McDonald's or Pizza Hut or multiple, companies, particularly food outlet companies, how they bring in an Indian touch of spice when they introduce products locally. So this is what we are talking about. So standardization is on a large scale. However, we find that there are certain variations that occur in terms of some cosmetic changes at an ingredient or a basic product level. So, arguments for adaptation. So, there is nothing wrong if in standardizing products. Like we said, there is economies of scale, the cost is reducing, it is easier to implement and easier to understand. If there is a break in one system, then we have certain changes that are being introduced which are standardized across. However, If you're talking in terms of, say, something like an automobile industry, there we cannot have a standardization. For example, if you are talking in terms of India and Europe versus an American car, there is a big difference in terms of left hand driving and right hand driving. So that means the steering wheel cannot be the same in both the market conditions. So that means a lot of adaptation has to take place. So it is not just a cosmetic change here that we are talking about, it is the very driving system itself which will affect all other ancillary units within that particular car or automobile. So that simple matter of left driving versus right driving will make sure that the car has to be modified significantly and adapted to the local conditions. So there is also another thing that, say, Americans are very used to, and that is a big car syndrome. So in the US markets, they understand that Americans are superior and they need to have bigger cars, and those are preferred, unlike foreign consumers. So the US car makers believe that American design for big cars means that big cars should be exported to overseas market. Interesting, right? And the left-hand drive syndrome is a corollary. What it means is to the big car syndrome. So Americans drive on the right side of the road, and steering wheel is on the left side of the automobile. But many Asian and European countries have a reverse system. So this is where the left hand, right hand syndrome has to be understood. A half-hearted effort will actually result in a half-hearted performance also. So American exporters have failed time and again to realize that when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And this, I think, this particular saying very clearly amplifies what international marketing is all about. That means you are adapting your product to the local conditions so that they in turn adopt your product and purchase it. So, so what are the product modifications that are required? For example, one is government's mandatory standards, that is the country's regulations. The second can be in terms of electrical current standards, particularly in terms of white goods like fridge and washing machine, mixie jar. These need to be adapted as per the country's power regulations or electric regulations. That means phase, frequency, voltage. If you saw in the past, if people used to bring, say, microwaves to India from the US, but those didn't really fit our system. So they had to be adapted locally because there was a huge difference between the kind of standards that we used then in the US versus how it was being used in India. Over a period in time, certain standardization has come there, and there are small tweaks that we can do to make sure that these products are standardized. If you see in terms of mobile phones, for example, today there's a lot of standardization in terms of the kind of charger that is being used across mobiles. And this talks about not just domestic products but international products as well. However, in the past, every mobile manufacturer used to have a very, very personalized standard of their charger and the connecting plug, which made sure of two things. One is that you had to use their charger only. Second, it would not fit a competitor's charger. And third, you're creating a kind of restricted accessibility with your charger. But now standardization has happened, and this is because internationally the products have moved to a stage where there's a lot of competition, and to survive, you need to make sure a certain level of standardization happens. At the same time, there are certain optional product modifications that also occur. One of the factors is like physical distribution. Now, it can be in terms of weight or volume, it can be a carrier change. There are multiple things. These are not mandatory, but they are good to have. So, optional product modification. Another one is climatic conditions. So, the hot, cold, humid, dry conditions in different countries will make sure that the same product cannot be introduced in exactly the same manner in different markets because of weather conditions. Another one is where there is a space constraint. For example, if you talk of Sears refrigerators, they were designed to be smaller in dimensions without sacrificing the original capacity. And why did they do that? So that they could fit into a Japanese home, which is typically smaller compared to a US home. So the Philips also, another example is where they reduced the size of the coffee maker so that they could fit into smaller spaces. And then there is also an environmental characteristic that we need to consider as an optional factor when we are introducing a product and adapting it to an international market. So, what are these environmental factors? Examples may be multiple, but one of them is detergents. The local water conditions. Does it have more salt? What does it have? What would affect the detergent from functioning as it is expected to behave because of the changes in the salinity in the hard water versus soft water, etc. Kodak also made a lot of changes in the graphic art products for Japanese professionals, most of them who prefer to work in different light environments. So, Kodak had a standardized format, but over a period in time, it realized that the same product cannot be introduced in an international market, say in a country like Japan, unless it made certain adaptations. And then price is, of course, a very, very important element. The same price that is being offered internationally cannot be offered uniformly in all countries because of the kind of pricing parity in terms of the ability to purchase, that is, the purchase parity that doesn't really exist across all countries. So there's a lot of difference in terms of the purchasing power of certain countries versus other countries. So the pricing has to be modified accordingly. We are also talking in terms of historical preference of or local customs and culture. So the product size, the color, the speed, the grade, the source from where we are acquiring the product has to be changed. Like we said, some cosmetic changes may have to be made, or bigger modifications may have to be made based on the local conditions. Sorry. The next aspect that we'll be looking about is in terms of branding decisions. So, in terms of branding, there are three factors that need to be considered. One is create classification and brand awareness. Second is guarantee a certain level of quality and satisfaction. And third is help with promotion. So here we are talking in terms of all these purposes. They have the same ultimate goal, that is nothing but to induce repeat sales. Not all products may have repeat sales, but those are larger products which may have a single buy, but there's also a referral system that works. And today we are talking in terms of repeat sales, even for products like white goods, isn't it? Earlier, when we talked in terms of making purchasing a fridge, we used to talk about a minimum life cycle of 10 years, if not more. Today, people are far more open to changing their fridges or refrigerators in a higher frequency, say maybe every 5 to 8 years. So these are changes that are happening. That means that there is certain repeat sales that is occurring. So, if you are looking in terms of branding level and alternatives, one important aspect is no brand versus brand. So, what does this mean? When you're talking about branding versus no branding, that means most US companies are branded. It does not mean that all products should be branded, right? So, today, when we are talking in terms of, say, electronic items or electrical items, most of them are branded. Automobiles are branded. However, if you are looking in terms of, say, some cookware, some are branded, some are not branded. So that is what we are trying to say. No brand versus brand. Each has its advantage. In terms of branding, you're building the brand. In terms of no branding, you're cashing in on offering a product at a slightly lower price, but then being able to have the flexibility to disappear from the market if your product doesn't really do well without too many repercussions happening. The second one is private brand versus manufacturer's brand. What is a private brand versus a manufacturer's brand? So, in a private brand, what we are fundamentally seeing is that the branding decision is fundamentally about does the original company which has been selling its product, are we using that brand name or are we using a private brand name, for example, that of the local distributor? So, that is also an important aspect that we need to consider. The third one is single brand versus multiple brands. So, in a single brand versus multiple brands, what happens here is if you are seeing companies like Hindustan Unilever Limited, HUL, it has Wheel, Surf Excel, Sunsilk, Lifebuoy, Vim, etc. There are multiple brands, each with a very, very specific market segmentation, targeting, and positioning. So their STP is very, very clear. They are not necessarily duplicates of each other. There are certain variations in terms of the kind of market they're capturing, in terms of the product they're offering, in terms of the quality, the pricing, ultimate customers who are going to use that particular brand. So that is why, though Unilever Limited or HUL is one large company, it has multiple brands of, say, even just detergents or soaps, because it is looking at a different market for each of these product variants. So that is why we need to understand single brand versus multiple brands. Casio is an example where it is considered a low watch pricing option or a low cost calculator option. So what happens is the minute someone hears of the term Casio, they know that it has a single brand, but the products that are being offered is far cheaper and of a certain quality, good quality. We can't say excellent quality, but definitely good quality, and something that will stay for a long period in time. So the market for Casio watches or Casio calculators will be very different from that of another company. And then finally, the local brand versus worldwide brand. I think this is the simplest thing to understand. When you're talking in terms of a local brand, Zudio, for example, is a local apparel brand, whereas Marks and Spencer is an international brand. So the kind of consumers that are there for Zudio versus Marks and Spencer may be very different because the target customers are different, the pricing is different, the product line is different. So there is a certain amount of differentiation that occurs between a local brand versus worldwide brand, and each has its own set of loyal consumers. The next aspect that we'll be looking at is in terms of brand consolidation. So, in terms of brand consolidation, there are multiple brands strategy that we have seen in the case of, say, HUL. At the end of the day, the Unilever markets a vast array of beauty, home care, and food products. They have multiple names, and we know very common names. Like for ice creams, we have Good Humor and Breyers, though they are not really offered in India. For soap, think like Dove, Lifebuoy. Dove was a product which was not being sold in India till about, say, 10 years ago. And today, Dove has become a part of most homes in terms of the strategy that the company introduced. If you are talking in terms of oral care, Close Up, Pepsodent, both strong competitors, both being offered under the same umbrella brand, but each has its own distinct market segmentation. Powders, personal care like Vaseline, Pond's, etc. And the list goes on. So that is why it's important that a package design modification is required. For example, in the case of Nestle, its name appears along with the local brand. So what the company does is, over a period of say 4 or 5 years, it tries to expand its market, and finally, what it does is its strategy is very simple. It replaces the local brand completely, and then starts selling